When converting fractions and decimals to percent form, we're going to really do the opposite of what we did when we started with the percent. So when we started with a percent, we multiplied that percent by 1 over 100, or 0.01, which moved the decimal to the left. Now we're going to go in the opposite direction. So I'm going to, for instance, if I'm starting with a decimal, instead of moving that decimal to the left, I'm now moving it to the right, because that's the same as multiplying by 100. So multiplying 0.045 times 100 would move 1, 2 to the right, making it 4.5%. Converting 4/5 to its percent form, again, I've got two choices here. One choice is, instead of multiplying by 1 over 100, which is what we did before when we put that percent over 100, I can take 4/5 times 100 over 1. When I do that, often things will reduce. So 5 reduces with 100 to make 1 and 20. 4 times 20 is 80 over 1, which gives me 80%. 4/5 could also be changed to a decimal, which is 0.8. And of course, we would do that by long division. And then the 0.8 would be multiplied by 100, or move the decimal 2 to the right, which of course gives me 80%. Let's try these 4 questions together. We're turning these into the equivalent percent form, so make sure each is labeled with percent. For the first, it is a fraction. With fractions, I find it easiest to multiply by 100 over 1. When I do that, I would reduce the 10 and the 100 to 1 and 10. 10 times 9 is 90. 1 times 1 is 1. 90 over 1 is, of course, 90, and that is a percent. So 90% is the same as 9/10. 0.0045, or 45 ten-thousandths. Again, I'm multiplying this by 100. No matter what, I'm multiplying by 100. Multiplying by 100 simply moves my decimal 2 places to the right. So it's 0.45%. 0.45%. 19 over 20, again multiplying by 100 over 1 rather than turning it into a decimal. 20 divided by 20 is 1. 100 divided by 20 is 5. 19 times 5 is 95 over 1, which gives me 95%. And the last one, 4.5, again, if I multiply that by 100, I'm moving the decimal twice. So of course that would be 450%. These are the same idea, of course, but sometimes you end up with fractions that don't work out so nicely, or decimals that just don't end. So let's take a look. If I take 3/7 multiplied by 100 over 1, nothing reduces. 3 times 100 is 300, and 7 over 1 is 7, and I can't leave that fraction as a percent. And so I would simply divide. Dividing 300 by 7, I get 42.857, and it keeps going. I want to round to the nearest tenth, so I'm going to call this about 42. That 5 says please round up, 42.9%. 5 and 7/8. 7/8 actually does turn into a nice little decimal for us. But that 5 is a little bit frustrating because it's a whole number. So again, I have two choices. One choice is to leave the 5 out front. Go ahead and reduce the 7/8. So 7 divided by 8 is 0.875. Take that value times 100. And taking it times 100 would, of course, move it to the right. And so that would give me 587.5%. The other way to do that question is, of course, to take 5 times 8, which is 40, plus 7. I would get 47/8 times 100 over 1. In that way, I would then, of course, reduce. I would reduce this by 4 and reduce this by 4. And I would end up with 47 times 25, which is 1175 divided by 2. And if I divide that number by 2, I get 587.5, And then of course that would be a percent. So notice I get the same answer either way. For 2 2/3, it's going to be similar to this one where I did not get a nice whole pretty answer. So I will have to round to the nearest tenth. Again, your choice. You can take 2 times 3, which is 6, plus 2, that's 8/3, times 100 over 1. Nothing reduces. I'm running out of room. So I get 800 over 3. 800 divided by 3 gives me 266.6 repeating. It just keeps going and going and going. And so I would round that to the nearest tenth as to be 266.7%, because of course that next 6 would round this 6 up to a 7. Make sure that everything is being labeled with that percent sign. And then 1 over 11 times 100 over 1. That gives me 100 over 11. I would of course use my calculator to divide. I would get 9.0909, etc. That's repeating. If I'm rounding to the nearest tenth, this 0 says I don't need to round up, so 9.09%. Not a bad idea when you finish to make sure that your answer makes sense. So looking at 1/11, this is obviously a small number, less than 1. So 9.09% does make sense. If I would have ended up with 90.1% or 90.9% over here, that wouldn't make sense because 1/11 is a very small number. These are 4 for you to try on your own, so try all 4, then press play to see how you did. For the first 0.124, 124 thousandths, to a percent would just multiply by 100 or move the decimal, so 12.4%. 5 1/2, I have a choice. Turn that into 5.5, then move the decimal twice, or turn this into 11 halves times 100 over 1. Either way, we get the same answer. If I take 11 times 50, I get 550. And that is what my percent would be, 550%. I would get the same thing, turning that into 5.5, multiplying it by 100, so I would move it 2 places, which is 550%. Either method is fine. 1 1/5, again, just as we did with 5 1/2, same concept. I would go ahead and turn that into 6/5 times 100 over 1. I would reduce, and that gives me 120, which is of course a percent, 120%. And the last one, 1/3 times 100 over 1 gives me 100/3, and that would give me 33.3 repeating. If I'm rounding to the nearest tenth, that would be 33.3%.